radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Today's Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. Let's do this. Man, how you doing? How you doing? All right. Let's start off here. Help support the show. You know what to do. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. The links are below. They are all signed. They all include shipping. The links are below. Get yourself a Fade to Black t-shirt today. Get a Game Changer membership. That's what you should do if you haven't done that already. Also, season 2. Lots of 2s tonight. I feel like, what was that TV show? The Love Connection. We'll be back in 2. Chuck Woolery. That was that guy's name. Chuck Woolery. 2 and 2. Season 2 is out of my TV show. It is called Into the Vortex with Jimmy Church, and the links for it are below. It's an amazing season. We're 2 episodes in right now, and the links for that, go down and click for Into the Vortex and check that out. All right, that's enough for now. Let's get straight to the show. Tonight, Martin Keller is with us. He is coming at us from Minnesota, where it is warm and balmy out there. And so Martin is with us tonight. Now, I've called the show Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And so we'll get into all of that and much more, because there might be some music involved in the show tonight. And that's why I do this show. I do this show because I am me. And what interests me, I remember years ago, many years ago, when I used to mention that quite often on the show. When I started off, things are what they are today. I get that. But when I started off, and I give this advice to any host or anybody that wants to get into the business or anything, just be yourself. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Don't try to imitate somebody else or emulate or do any of that. No, just be yourself. And who am I? I like the heavy metal music. I like really good food, and I like conspiracies and UFOs and ancient history and ghosts and all that stuff. And if I could do a show that had all of that in it, then I'm just being myself, because that's just like a normal conversation around my dinner table, right? And so tonight, I think I can do that with Martin. We're going to be doing all of that. We're going to be exploring high strangeness experiences, the current state of ufology. We're going to talk about, maybe we'll jump into some Congress stuff that are not only featured in his writing, but they're also out there in the media and everything else. And his book, UFO memoir, his UFO memoir, The Space Pen Club, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, UFO Disclosure, Consciousness, and Other Mind Zoomers. We will be talking about that. He is, he says former, he's a writer, pop culture journalist. He's been published in Rolling Stone, Leaders, The Washington Post, Boston Globe, Final Frontier, Billboard, and so much more. So we're going to be getting into that. How can we not? And then his relationship with CSETI, the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And there you go. And that's basically what the Space Pen Club is based on. The links for everything are below. They're over on our website and throughout social media. So with that, I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Martin Keller. There he is, warm and balmy, toasty. Toasty.
How you doing, Jimmy?
I am fantastic, sir. And it's so great to finally have you on the show. And, I know that I joke and I kid around about the weather and things. And I stopped. We're going to get to the first time guest disclaimer in a second. I stopped talking about the weather in Southern California. I used to, do it all the time. And I get the email. I would. It's not funny, man. Out here, I had to shovel my driveway 7 times this week just to get to work. And you're sitting there talking about palm trees. Not cool, man.
Yeah.
So,
it's all static out there.
What's that?
It's a static environment.
Yeah. Well,
it's always beautiful.
Dude, very static. Very static. I remember, let's get the first time guest disclaimer, which is this. Martin, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. But you have to accept.
I accept. Where do I pledge?
Now we can move on. Well, so the static part about it, not so true. I live in the Mojave Desert, about 40 miles north of Los Angeles, and last winter I had snow. We had snow here. I had snow in my backyard for weeks, and the snow in the mountains, which ended the drought out here, by the way, was out there for like 2-3 months, just white, a mile, by the way, from my house. I was surrounded. It looked like I lived in Boulder or something. So it's, but I moved out here because of David Lee Roth. And I'm in Indianapolis, not Minneapolis, but the other Apple, right? I'm in Indianapolis. And I'm over at a friend's house around late November, early December. And in the early 80s, and on MTV, there's David Lee Roth and his California Girls video, Venice Beach. And I'm watching that, and I'm looking outside, and I just scrape my windows to drive to my friend's house. I'm done with Indy. I'm just done. I'm going to California. I flew out the next day. I get here to California in late November, and it's cold. I was like, what happened to the video? Right? What happened? It's not supposed to be cold out here. So it's not as static as it seems to be, but we don't have 8 feet of snow like you do right now.
Well, we don't have any snow at the moment. Last year we had 90 inches.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember. The few times that I've been to Minneapolis in the winter, and I have, dude, the snow plow, you were driving down streets with 6-foot walls of snow on both sides, and it was like a labyrinth. And that's my memory. You're saying you don't have any snow right now? That's weird.
We're feeling the effects of the super El Nino that's running out in the Pacific, and probably you need to factor in the climate, climate X, whatever that is.
Sure.
The climate crisis that we're in.
Right. I need to make a quick comment. Genocide. My stuff isn't posting. I saw your post about coming out here, and just send me an email about that, and we'll get that set up. Sorry about that, Martin. My computer is not. I'm going out to a bunch of different platforms, and one of those platforms is not taking my. It's kind of weird. Yeah, I don't know, technology. We were talking before the show, and I kind of want to start here. Obviously, music is part of it, but how do you go? What was the dynamic paradigm shift in your life for you to go from being a pop culture writer and journalist in Minneapolis, doing your thing, and then driving off the freeway into the world of UFOs? Was it one specific event? How did that happen?
Well, a couple different things. I had a sighting in high school long before I began my career in pop culture journalism. I grew up in remote western North Dakota, and I had a sighting with 3 other friends during a very cold month, mid-February, late 60s, and there'd been UFO reports all over the western part of the state. And somebody came in during a varsity basketball game and said, "Hey, there's a big effing UFO over the experiment station." There was a North Dakota State University farm extension office about a quarter of a mile down the road from my high school, which at the time was on the edge of town. And we ran out there without our winter coats. We saw it. It was a luminous object about 30 to 40 feet. Just seemed to be hovering over the field. And one of them, my buddy, said, "Let's get in my car and go see it." And I think I was the idiot that said, "Nah, we don't have our coats. We have a good game inside. And this is what everybody's been reporting all week. Let's go see the end of the game." And, I'd obviously like to have a mulligan on that. But I was a space nerd as a kid. I wrote to NASA and got all their public relation materials, big thick packets on the Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini programs, and autographed pictures of the astronauts, which I put, I picked out my favorite astronauts, put them on my wall with my Dylan, Stones, and Beatles posters. And, I read the UFO trade rags at that, during that period, and was very interested in space and everything that comes through it or goes through it or comes out of it. And then I went off to college and I kind of forgot about it until, early 90s when some strange stuff started to happen in my house.
Well, okay, that's pretty bizarre. It's kind of typical in a strange way, but then it just erupted. There wasn't a reason for it.
As I outline in the book, there seemed to be a process. There seemed to be a method to this high strangeness. I started having very interesting dreams. I had reoccurring dreams. I had a lucid dream about being in a harbor city, and a flying bus comes through the vista, and there's a smoldering pier at my feet. And 6 weeks later, I'm in Boston. I'm in South, over there by Faneuil Hall, going to meet my parents to go to the Red Sox game. And I'm walking on this path that leads to Faneuil Hall. I'd stayed at a friend's place nearby, and I stopped on a little footbridge, and it was the exact same vista I'd seen in my dream 6 weeks earlier in Minneapolis. No flying bus, but as friends in the UFO community soon enlightened me, flying buses are masked imagery for flying saucers or close encounters. I went, "Oh, okay." But that really blew my mind. That moment on that footbridge, I call it the quiet awakening. And that was a start. And about 2 months after that, I met Dr. Stephen Greer as a freelance journalist. And Greer, as probably most of your listeners know, founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI. And his organization was just getting off the ground. He wanted some higher visibility. So I did a few interviews with him, and I did a Skywatch, the whole deal that he does, his CE5 initiative, where you use sound, light, and remote viewing, or mind sight, as I like to call it, to vector in spacecraft from other parts in the universe or other dimensions. I mean, it still blows my mind that I can even talk with a straight face about this, but it was pretty engaging. I wrote what I thought was a really great 20-page piece, and I could not sell it to anybody. Now, this is, at the dawn of the internet. Today, I could publish that thing in 12 different places and make probably $20. But I could not sell it. And I told him, I said, and I'd been working in public relations after I jettisoned my pop culture career. I said, I could probably get you more coverage, greater visibility if I move to the other side of the desk and help you with public relations, which is what I did. It was a pro bono gig. I got my expenses covered for travel and office expenses, stuff like that. And Greer and I had some interesting experiences through most of the 90s. And then I bailed out of that because I had a young family and needed to make real money. But my interest in the UFO subject has never waned.
The ability to the CE5 process, the ability to do that, how strange was it to you at that time to hear about the protocols and if the possibilities were there of doing something like this? Were you taken aback by it, or were you like, okay, this might work? Because it is a pretty bizarre process to the uninitiated, isn't it?
It is and it isn't. And, as I write in the book and as I still talk about it today, I said it was the craziest thing that I ever engaged in, but it was also the most fascinating. And I saw pretty good proof of the protocols when they worked. They didn't always work. And the thing I liked about Greer was that he framed it as an experiment, a real-time experiment under the sky to try to contact the visitors. I found that very intriguing, grassroots effort all the way, which I think is really important. I think it's going to play an even more important role as we move forward during this so-called alleged disclosure period we're in. But the protocols are pretty amazing in and of themselves. Remote viewing is a fascinating topic. I'm pretty sure you've had guests on here who have addressed that issue at length. But I'm fascinated by the whole discussion around mind and consciousness. I think it's truly the final frontier, unlike space exploration.
Yeah, for sure. I have done quite a few official CE5 events, but I've kind of developed my own techniques as well, which all involve Van Halen and pastrami sandwiches. That's a whole nother story, but it's whatever works for you, right? And there is a definite conscious connection to what is actually going on. And that part of this is high strangeness, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I have a quote in the book from John Alexander, who I'm sure you're familiar with, your listeners probably are, Colonel John Alexander, who wrote a book, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. And this is one of my favorite quotes. We agree that at times hard physical craft exist, but there's much more to the phenomenon. Unfortunately, the true boundaries are unknown. It seems certainly that human consciousness is at least part of the formula. So, Alexander's a straight shooter. He doesn't mince a lot of words. Like Steve Greer, he's kind of a polarizing figure. But I think that quote is right on the money.
What went through your mind the first time you saw the phenomena happen because of a CE5?
Well, a couple of things. I went out on a couple of different CE5 events early on as part of Greer's organization. And in two instances, one at a big fundraiser here over in Wisconsin with Horst Rechelbacher, who the founder of Aveda, who's very interested in consciousness and all this stuff. You would have loved him. He passed away a few years ago, but he hosted a fundraising event for CSETI, and we were out under the stars for 3 or 4 hours after an introduction to the whole CE5 initiative over dinner, a little lecture by Dr. Greer, and we went out there. Well, nothing happened, and we had about 30 people in the field, and 2 of them were visiting shaman from Estonia, and one of them just said, at the end of the night, they'll be here tomorrow. That's the channel he had gotten from during the exercises, the meditation, and everything. And sure enough, the next night when we weren't in that field, two of Horst's employees reported orbs in that vicinity, right where we had sat in a circle and conducted the protocols. And I saw that again in another instance, but perhaps the most interesting and compelling one was an event in Mexico in the volcano zone. And I was down there with Greer on what he calls the RMIT, Rapid Investigative Mobile. I forget what the T is, but it's basically the seasoned CSETI members who've been in the field, who have probably had a sighting or an encounter or some high strangeness events. And we were in Mexico in the volcano zone next to Mount Popo, which is the second largest volcano in the world. It's active, occasionally blows out a lot of lava and rocks. It's 80 miles from Mexico City. If the thing ever really blew, it would have catastrophic effects, probably, because there'd be earthquakes. And Mexico City, which is built on a lake basin, would probably sink further into that basin. But that said, we were down there. We were being shadowed by a news crew from CBS News 48 Hours program, and they were doing a special on the UFO issue. This is like 1996, 95. And, there'd been a big wave in Mexico since the total solar eclipse there in the early 90s. And UFOs appeared all over the place, all over Mexico City, out in the rural areas. And that was one of the reasons why we were there, because there was still ongoing activity, especially in the zone, the volcano zone. And this news crew, when the piece finally aired, they make us look like rubes. I mean, it was really disingenuous. I was furious with the producer that didn't use any of the material I'd given. Like, why are you in Mexico? Well, there's been a tremendous UFO wave ongoing here. The Mexican media reports on it regularly without any, grins or giggles. And they call them the ovnis, which is my favorite name for this phenomena. I think the unknowns, the ovnis. And but the first night we were out, in the first hour, in fact, before we even started the protocols, I noticed an object coming out of the sky at about 2:00. I told our group, and I yelled to the camera guy and the sound guy to start rolling film, and they captured this incident. The object came by us. Greer flashed it with his high-powered light twice. It responded in kind 2 times. Flashed it again, this time 3 times. It responded again 3 times, and then it went down, beneath a butte, out of our view. And here's kind of the backstory to that setting. The host for that show, African American guy named Harold Dow, and his producer were not on site with us. Their car had broken down in Puebla, about 40 miles away. And I went, what? CBS can't afford to put them in a cab or rent a car to get here for the first night of this? So they didn't even see this. They saw it on film after the fact. And then the next night we had some interesting activity up by the volcano that really spooked Mr. Dow. And I said, well, welcome to CSETI and the world of high strangeness. And but it's interesting, when the show finally aired, like 3 weeks later, our segment, we were 3 or 4 segments. They used that opening footage of this object signaling with us, but they didn't provide any basic 101 journalism on what was happening here. I mean, it was a horrible job of reporting.
Well, yeah, okay. One night we're doing the Sky Watch, and we've got maybe 150 people. and crazy stuff is jumping off right now. And I happen to be, and I understand the position that I'm in. I get that. I'm hosting Coast to Coast. I've got Fade to Black. I've got my TV shows, and I'm a pretty visible person, and in a pretty good position to comment on things. But this particular night, stuff is jumping off. There was a documentary film crew from another country. They were there. They were filming. Anyway, so the craziness is happening. I get in my car and I'm driving away, and I said to myself, if Anderson Cooper was here, right, and he saw this, would he go on CNN the next night and talk about it? And my answer to myself was no. I seriously doubt it. But I did. So what do I do? And Martin, I decided at that point that there was no way that those people that were, they need that kind of support. So I turned around and I called my producer over at Premiere Radio, and or she called me. So what's going on for Friday night? I said, my guest is going to be me. She goes, what? And I told her why. She goes, definitely. Okay, yeah, do it. So I did. But here's the crazy part. Here I am speaking to, I'm just going to pull a round number out. I don't know, 2 million people, right? 2.5 million. Twice as many as Anderson Cooper on CNN, right? And I told the whole story, and I took phone calls for 3 hours. Nothing. I didn't get a phone call from Fox or from CNN or from the New York Times or the BBC, no, Washington Post. Nobody contacted me.
What's the time frame on this?
And this was probably 98, 97, 96. Or what am I saying? 2096. 2013, 2014. So 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. And nothing. I got crickets from the media. Now, and you're right. Today it's a different story.
Yeah.
But if you're in that position, like Dow was, if you're in that position, what do you do with it? Well, the media was a different arena back then, and it was like an unsafe zone to go into. And although I understand it, a real journalist will take chances, and that's the problem.
Well, you would hope so, but Jimmy, this subject has been so professionally managed and more seriously marginalized for so long, decades. I mean, the bumpers they have up around this, which are now finally crumbling, thank God. They were very effective. The Robertson panel in 52 was tasked with how are we going to deal with this issue? Ever since Roswell, Roswell was 5 years earlier,
right?
And the sightings didn't stop after that. The crashes didn't stop after that. And the Robertson panel came up with a very, I think, inspired, sort of nefarious strategy. We're going to deny the subject is real, and 2, we're going to ridicule anybody, regardless of who is reporting a sighting. We're going to ridicule their perceptions. And it worked. I mean, there were very few UFO shows from the 50s up until probably the 90s. There was one with, I just blanked on his name. He was a former military guy who started one of the Alphabet Soup civilian UFO research groups who went on CBS.
Yeah, Donald Kehoe.
Yeah. He was one of my heroes in this massive field of crazy ufology. Kehoe actually got censored at the end of the program for no apparent reason.
Yeah, they cut him off.
Yeah, they cut him off. They cut him off. Totally cut him off.
Two nights after they cut Kehoe off. Well, I mean, just a little short background on this. It was a scripted show.
Right.
And they rehearsed and they did all, it was live, right? But it was scripted. And so at the end of the show, he went off script, dude, and they faded him out, man. And cut his mic. So the next night, he goes on, or 2 nights later, or the next night, he's on Long John Nebel's show out of New York. And Long John Nebel's show, The Party Line out of New York, was running about 25, it's kind of crazy numbers to think about it, 25 million people a night. Wow. Right. And it was way, way before Coast to Coast and what, but 25, even more actually than that, out of WOR out of New York. And so anyway, so Kehoe's on the show. And I got to tell you, Long John, very cool dude, was pretty pissed off. And he was angry. And so he had brought Kehoe on the show to explain the entire thing. And Donald was on Nebel's show many, many, many times. They were friends. And that CBS broadcast was a really, really big deal for everybody. And there was a lot of prep behind it. And Kehoe, he had a very unique voice. But if you go back and listen to Long John Nebel's show with him, man, and then they cut me off, they faded it down, and I was, and it could have been a seminal moment. And instead they rolled credits on him.
Yeah.
And it was like that, like he said, it was like that for another 25, 30 years.
It reminds me of the Larry King show contacted us. And I'm going to brag here a little bit, but I'm a fairly good publicist. I got Steve Greer on that show because I connected with his executive producer in a very heartfelt letter that laid out some pretty interesting facts and also explained the whole CE5 initiative. Well, I got Greer on Larry King's show. I think it was the mid 90s, 94, 95. It's in the book. With 2 other people, that desert rat out there by Area 52. I forget his real name, but he's like a UFO or Area 51 watchdog. And Stanton Friedman was on via tape. Most of the program was live, though, from around Area 51. The show got the highest ratings ever of any Larry King special he had ever done to that point. And he invited Greer back on. Well, Greer wanted to go back on 2 years later as we were approaching the first disclosure event in Washington, April of 97. And he said, come back anytime. So, we reached out. The producer that we had worked with was gone. We reached out personally to Larry. We reached out to the new producers, and it was nothing. Somebody dropped a curtain on that, an iron curtain. And it's interesting because this Greer went on the program, and I was hoping he would. This was like within a month of him meeting with Woolsey at the CIA for a 3.5-hour meeting with Woolsey, his wife, John Peterson, who ran a small think tank and was friends with Woolsey, and Steve Greer and his wife, Emily. Now, in subsequent years, when this story surfaced again, Woolsey denied it. So we put out a news release saying, hey, man, this happened, and here are the details, and here's what was discussed. So I'm hoping Greer's going to go on Larry King and blow this up, but he was very politic about it. He didn't do it. He didn't feel like it was the time or the place. But, here's another example. Like Larry says, come back anytime when you have new information. Well, Steve's always got new information. I haven't been in contact a lot with him since I left the organization officially, but I obviously have followed what he's been doing. He did contact me to invite me out to his latest disclosure event in Washington last June, which got very little coverage, really disappointing. He relies on pro bono help, and you get what you pay for. There wasn't much media coverage of that at all. It's really unfortunate because it was a pretty exciting and enlightening event. But
yeah, it was a good event. I watched it. I was busy. He had invited me out. That's beside the point. But I didn't get a chance to go. I had some friends that were there. But anyway, I did.
Danny Sheehan showed up.
What's that?
Danny Sheehan showed up.
Well, yeah, and Billy Carson was there, and so forth. But anyway, I was talking to Billy on the phone from the event, and then Billy got to ask. I think he asked the first question, or right in there. But anyway, you're right about that. The event itself, there was a lot of pretty good information there, so much so that I reached out to a couple of the presenters there, whistleblowers, whatever you want to call them, and had them on my TV show and also here on Fade to Black. And then there was a couple of moments of disorganization, and I was watching that, and I think it's right back to your point, right? It could have been smoother, and there were a couple of tense moments there that were based on technical issues, and it was kind of unfortunate that it didn't get the traction that it deserved.
Well, it didn't during that time frame, but I think subsequently they racked up quite a few viewer numbers online, which is good. I mean, everything's happening on the internet. Traditional media is just about ready to tip over, I think, in terms of ability to generate viewer numbers and revenue. So yeah. Well, if you Mike Herrera, who
very
dramatic stuff.
Yeah, and I went out. So I go out to dinner with Mike, and I've had him on the show. I've had on my TV show too as well. But talking to Mike and listening, sat next to me at the dinner table for like 3 hours, 4 hours, and looking into his eyes and listening to what he has to say around his own experience while a Marine is pretty dramatic stuff. And I would think that another, somebody out there, a journalist or something, would take this story and as a witness and absolutely run with it. I did. And
the Guardian, which is kind of a tabloid, ran the story, I think a day before Michael's testimony at the Washington event, I think June 13th or whatever it was, which I found kind of interesting. It's like, well, okay, they got a scoop here, but nobody else went near it. And it's probably because it's so explosive. I trust your listeners know what we're talking about. He stumbled on a large craft of some sort that appeared to be one of ours, and they were offloading or inloading looked like guns, maybe drugs, and they were threatened with death by these soldiers that were around this craft who had no insignias of any type. Some sort of deep black operation that some good people in Congress through the years have said, yeah, this, there's a secret government. They have their own forces. They have their own cash flow. They have their own revenue generating mechanisms. By the way, did anybody notice where that $1 trillion went missing in the Pentagon budget this year? There's your answer. That's how they fund all this stuff.
Yeah.
Michael's story, very dramatic. He's lucky those guys didn't smoke them out there in the jungle.
Yeah, well, it was in the Philippines, and they were on patrol, And what was the interesting part about this is they got the jump on them. They weren't prepared, right? And they're just walking. They're on patrol, but they're not, trigger happy. They're, and these guys were.
Yeah.
So immediately they had the edge on them. Those guys were locked and loaded. So, disarmed all of them. But in the meantime, in the background where he sees this craft, what happens? He sees like Ford F-250s pull up, right? So we're not alien vehicles, our vehicles.
Yeah.
And so he knew at that point that there was something going on here, but he couldn't quite figure it out. Is this an ET craft? Is this our craft? Who are these? No insignias, nothing that got the jump on us. Obviously, this is a force. This is a funded force that we're not familiar with, and it's a crazy, amazing story that truly affected him for sure.
Yeah, I blogged about that whole event. You can find it at the spacepenclub.com website for the book. I have an ongoing blog there where I try to stay plugged into all the fire hose of events that have occurred since the New York Times piece in 2017. My book came out initially around the first report in 2021. I think that dropped in late June. My book was out about 2 weeks before that, but I've been keeping up with developments on this blog. And I spent a little time with Michael at this event and, trying to vibe him out, if you will. Like, are you for real? And I mean, he's salt of the earth guy. And
yeah, he is.
He doesn't have an agenda like a lot of people in this field, as you know, you and I both know. All the witnesses that were up there that weekend were very credible. And, you can watch it on YouTube now. I'm pretty sure the whole thing is posted there.
Now, why do you think, especially as a writer and a journalist and an author yourself, and you've been a part of the media for a long time, mentioning the different, the Condon report and so forth, where suddenly we've got the switch has been flipped. Somebody has, yanked the string on the lamp, and now it's a safe zone to go into. But as a journalist, what do you think is ultimately responsible for that kind of decision making for the media and the Pentagon to suddenly put this stuff on the front burner?
Well, that's a great question, and I think about it a lot. Couple of things. One, obviously, the most obvious is the New York Times piece in December of 17th, 2017, exposing the secret Pentagon study where Lou Elizondo was running that in the early aughts, and set up by late Senator Harry Reid out of Nevada. That was on the front page of the Times. I read that story 3 times and looked for any mention of the words or expressions conspiracy theory, conspiracy. There was none of that reporting in there, thanks to Leslie Keene and
Ralph Blumenthal.
Ralph Blumenthal was also a freelancer, and then the Times military reporter who's on staff there. Her name is at the tip of my tongue, but it's a great piece of work, and that opened the floodgates. That sanctioned it. That took the veil down, if you will, and it made this a legitimate topic. If you didn't have a UFO story in 2017, 2018 in your media news cycle, you're missing the boat, baby. That was one thing. In chapter 9 of my book, which is about disclosure and the disclosure process, what's the name of that? I got to look at my notes here real quick. It's The Road to Disclosure, The Barriers to Truth, chapter 9 in the Space Pen Club. I explore that period, and I also speculate that maybe the boys upstairs, as I like to call them, that's my little euphemism for the visitors. Maybe they have given the signal that the charade has to end. And, you know, I trust the analysis that Dan Sheehan brings to this topic because he's been involved in it so long. He's a critical thinker. He thinks legally, but he also thinks intellectually. And Sheehan, during that period, made some interesting comments, which tends to support my sort of intuitive or purely speculative idea that maybe it's coming from up there, maybe this disclosure nonsense, because Earth is at a tipping point as the UN has issued for about the last 4 years some code red climate reports every year. It's like, we have to get this under control. And one thing Sheehan said on a podcast with the guy out of Canada, does a great job. I'm sure you know him.
Dave Scott.
No, not Dave Scott. Grant.
Oh, Grant Cameron.
Grant Cameron, yep. I watched a podcast that Sheehan was on with some other folks, Preston Dennett, some other ufologists and so-called experiencers. And Sheehan made an interesting comment that seemed to fortify what my thought process was on that. And Sheehan said, if you look at the close encounter cases, the CE4s, close encounters of the fourth kind cases that are solid, that you can't really rip apart, the message from the visitors to the experiencers is always the same. One, your environment is in danger. Your planet is in danger. You need to get this, take care of your home, basically, your home planet. Number two, you need to get rid of the nuclear weapons because they not only are they a major threat to life on Earth, but they're a threat to the fabric of space and to probably any interstellar travelers that are in the neighborhood. And he said this is a reoccurring theme in all of these close encounter cases. And that makes me think maybe, these visitors, which seem to know more than we do, they have a lot of psychic abilities in addition to their highly advanced technology. Maybe they see something that we can't see, even though we see evidence of climate change everywhere across the globe, really. So maybe it's them. I don't know. Cliff High, who I don't know. Have you ever had Cliff on your show?
No, I haven't. I barely know. I haven't heard that name in like 10 years. Is he still around?
Yeah, he's still around. He was pretty hot for a while with his predictive linguistics thing. Usually, basically harvesting all the data from the internet and finding.
That's how I became familiar with him. Was
find all the big data points that predict future events, which I found pretty fascinating. I'm intrigued by all that kind of stuff. Anyway, Cliff High, during that same period when this Time story came out, said, I think this is happening because the forces that control it and the bankroll that funds it all is gone bust. They can't keep doing this. Corporations that are involved can't be involved anymore. Payouts to people that maintain their silence. None of this is any longer sustainable. And I thought that was a fairly informed, reasonable assessment of things, not unlike Mr. Sheehan. So,
yeah, those are two. Those directly contrast each other. And the other part about this now, although you attribute that to Danny, and I love Danny, he's one of my close friends, but the comments about that they go back a ways. They go back into the 70s where different, not only skeptics, but different researchers would say, these contactees, they all kind of have the same story. It's flowers, it's love and light, and it's, peace and no more war and clean, the pollution and no more nuclear weapons. They're listening to each other. That this is some kind of psychosis. This isn't part of the reality of it. But when I look at that, and I've always had this thought, Martin, that of course, I mean, yeah, I think that would be the message from somebody that is more advanced than us. The only way that they got to where they are is without the mess that we have on this planet. Because if we continue doing what we're doing, we're not going to be around to explore other planets. And really I think that message is a real one. I don't think it's some deep made up psychosis. I would think that for us to progress, we have to really take a close look at ourselves and get rid of some nasty habits. There isn't another way forward, is there?
I think that's exactly right. Something you said just triggered another idea. I think the other thing that's happening, maybe in parallel in a sort of third or fourth stream, is that the commercialization of space is going to play heavily into the UFO discussion. As soon as guys like Elon Musk and Richard Branson at Virgin and what's his name in Vegas, big
Bigelow.
As soon as those guys get their commercial space tourism thing going, what's going to happen when you've got some VIPs up there and they start seeing these spacecraft? That's going to be a huge PR issue, number one. But that's going to happen. That day has already dawned.
Do you think that for those out there, do you think that vindication is always the word that people use? I don't have a broad enough vocabulary to use something else. But for those out there that have talked about their sightings or their contact experiences, are they in a position now to say, see, I told you so? Are we at that point, or do we still have further to go?
Well, that's a good question too, Jimmy. I think the public at large, and this is my personal feeling, the public at large, I think, will acknowledge that, that it's all probably real, but what's in it for me? I still got to write that check for my daycare person. I got to pay my rent every month. What's going to happen? So what? And moreover, where's the evidence? Show us the biologics, as David Grush has so well put it in his last congressional testimony in July in Washington. Show us the stuff. We want to see the stuff. But I think there's probably a lot to be gained. I was lucky enough to get Dan Aykroyd, who's been into the subject as long as you and I. He wrote a nice endorsement for my book. If I can read this section, I think it's pertinent to this discussion right at this point. This is what's in it for us. This is what's in it for Ma and Pa Kettle, for the man on the street, the woman that's trying to figure out how to pay her medical bills. The Space Pen Club is an essential read for anyone interested in getting to the truth about one of the greatest mysteries and enigma in our existence. Who owns these hyper-advanced off-world aerodynamic platforms? Who controls their obviously intelligent, non-human operators? And if these things are known to anyone, why can't that technology be shared now? The mechanisms and fuel sources in these crafts could help save our planet and provide basic needs for millions: power, clean water, and climate temperance. And I think that's a really thoughtful, insightful comment. I think all of that is true. And these 0-point energy systems that these crafts seem to rely on, those can be commercialized in a heartbeat, I think. I don't know if anyone, have you personally seen the Lost Century and How to Reclaim It, Greer's last film that was crowdfunded?
Yeah, I've seen them all. Yeah, I know. Michael and I talk every day.
I love Michael. I think
he's a good dude. He's a good dude.
He's a really good dude.
The issues that I have, though, before we're going to take a break here in just a second, but I understand the points that like Greer and others try to make about this subject. They're using energy sources that we have access to, farming and feeding in the world, and energy and electricity and heating our schools, and how upset people would be. And we've got to get through the petrochemical side of things before we can have access to the. And I understand that point. It gets people's attention, but I'll say this. And this is my realistic side of things. Even if ET communicated with us in those terms, we're not technically savvy enough to understand. It's really that simple. You cannot go back 100 years to 1923 and explain packet switching to Thomas Edison and the ability to build an internet and the World Wide Web. You couldn't do it. And so to get to the basis of 0 point or free energy or what runs the cosmos, we're not there yet. We're not there. We can't wrap our head around that. So I understand the point, and it's a great debate, and it's a fun thing to discuss, but we're not there yet. We're still in covered wagons, and we don't have the ability or the knowledge base to absorb that into society. We're not there.
I think there probably is an elite strata of organizations, corporations, all operating at a highly classified level that do understand these technologies, that haven't deployed them into our own type of spacecraft. And I don't think it would take that long to make that shift.
Maybe not.
If these assets are already known and already in use, I don't think it's that hard to get from A to W. Okay.
Let me ask you this. Now, I do believe, as a fact, I do believe that we have craft that are sitting there around the planet. Absolutely. Don't know how to fly them. And if you go back, like I said, if you went back, you don't even have to go back 100 years. Let's go back 50. Let's go back to the 60s. And you hand somebody one of these locked, right?
Yeah.
And say, use this. It could happen. It wouldn't. And if you went back 100 years or 200 years, 300 years, give Da Vinci a flat screen TV. Is Leonardo, going to be able to figure out electricity and how to turn that thing on? Probably not. And he was a smart guy. So yeah. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have the craft, but do we know how to fly them?
Yeah, I don't know if we do. But
yeah, I don't know.
If you trust the Colonel Phil Corso's download on this, that all the technology from the Roswell crash and the other crash that he allegedly handled that was fed into the free enterprise system, i.e. the major corporations, Raytheon and, Boeing, and, the list is short but mighty. A lot of that technology is slowly becoming commercialized, I think. I mean, Corso said a lot of the microchip technologies that they found in the Roswell crash has ended up, in free enterprise in developments, like smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah. You only have to give somebody the idea of something and then let it run. I mean, we can go to something like Star Trek and all of the Dick Tracy, the smart, the TV.
yeah.
If you give somebody the idea, yeah, okay, I totally get that. You see a bird fly, well, okay, let's build a plane. But to be given an example of technology, if they don't know what a telephone is, so why would they know that this is a communication device?
Yeah.
They wouldn't, you have to be taught. So that's my thing. I don't know. Is there a nefarious group of it's kind of like Dr. Strangelove, right? Sitting around and discussing these things with this technology? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. And is it going on? Sure. Is the petrodollar still driving the economy? Absolutely. Are they going to drive that until the world runs out of gas? Probably. So
or it burns up.
Yeah. Well, what do you do? I've got to take a break, but let me ask you this: how do you monetize free energy?
Well, somebody's got to administer and manage it. So
Right.
you have to set up some sort of infrastructure and commercial, maybe. Smarter minds than mine, I guess, would
Well,
have,
that's
would
the whole
have
thing.
that plan. Would have that plan.
That's the whole thing. Yeah,
Somebody's gonna make money, man. This is capitalism. This is greedy humans. I mean,
yeah, I know. That's the whole thing with fuel cell vehicles. Hydrogen powered vehicles. We got all the hydrogen that we can handle, right? But until you can monetize that, because the world's oceans, that's the whole thing. Talk about 0 point. Forget about that. Hydrogen fuel cells. You take the seawater, you separate the oxygen and the hydrogen, you put the hydrogen in the car, right? You drive it. Out of the car comes water vapor. Right? That's the exhaust. And that goes back into the, and it's a cyclical thing. You're not getting rid of anything, right? And you're replenishing, but there's no way to really monetize it because it's kind of like free energy. So they don't want to
figure out a way to do it.
Oh, they have. Oh, we have the fuel cell vehicles, but they have
Somebody will
excuses.
figure out a way to commercialize it and make a buck at the end of the day.
Somebody will. Martin, you stay right there. I got to take a quick break. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Martin Keller. I'll be right back.
My job is not to preach. My job is to take you on this journey.
In a state of passion, nothing negative can happen.
That it's the moons of those planets that would have life.
Sometimes I see, these energies also in your field.
It is our passion and our pleasure.
Hi, everybody. Jimmy Church here. Very special announcement, and that is we are shipping Fade to Black t-shirts again. It's been almost 2 years. We did a full upgrade to the website, so you can head over to jimmychurchradio.com. It's all simple to do, and it's right there. Remember, we broadcast 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. We bring you the best, the brightest, the most knowledgeable and amazing guests, the best conversations. We do that 4 nights a week. We also do 4 days a week. We broadcast the news, and we do that live too as well. It's not a one-man show. I do it with website support. I do it with producers. I do it with writers and artists. All contribute to the show. The best way to help support what we do here is with the Fade to Black t-shirt. And you can get your Fade to Black t-shirt one of 2 ways. First, go to jimmychurchradio.com, order a shirt. It's really that simple. You're going to get a tracking number, it's going to get shipped, and it's going to get autographed. The second way to get a shirt is with a Game Changer membership. Now, the Game Changer membership not only includes a free t-shirt, but you get a private email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads. You have full access to the website, and everything includes free shipping, and everything is autographed. So help support the show. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. The links are below. You can just go to jimmychurchradio.com, and it's right on the website. So there you go. I'm Jimmy Church, Fade to Black. I'm so excited that I just have one thing to say. Go Packley Tappy. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Martin Keller, journalist, pop culture writer, and of course, author as well. And he's with us live from Minnesota. And Martin, we're talking about disclosure and the efforts that have been going on. We mentioned Donald Kehoe earlier. And you would have thought that the progress that was being made by Kehoe and others in the 50s and 60s, we would be in a different place today. But it is happening now. Do you think that the world is ready? The conversation has been there for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I think people have been, number one, conditioned, softened up by all the films, the books. I mean, how much information do you need before you could say, yeah, it's a real subject. Let's get it out in the open. Let's see where it goes from here. There's no telling where it's going to go right now, since David Grush has kind of taken center stage in Washington with his whistleblowing testimony. That said, you know, this Schumer amendment that's been battered around in Congress, I think it's going to get finally passed into law and probably get Biden's signature before the end of the year. I think that's just a formality. There's some stuff in there that's going to, you know, drive more transparency. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I think we're in a disclosure period, but
Yeah. David Grush, what I found so interesting about his statements and his testimony was the interest in the questions from the elected officials. I think they were blindsided and caught by surprise, but nobody was arguing with him, and the eyes were opened. And when somebody like Grush says, I can tell you where the bodies are, I can tell you where the crafts are, I'll give you the addresses, let's go into a skiff, and I've got a list of everything that you need right here. There wasn't any pushback from that. And the world didn't implode either. You know, if you go back to the Rand Corporation or Brookings or Condon or any of these groups that had said that, you know, religious order, you know, there'd be anarchy in the streets and Wall Street would collapse and the world would just stop in its tracks. And that didn't happen. But that's also part of the news cycle, too, as well, where there was different news the next day. And suddenly, Grush, as big as that was, and it was huge, man, I was listening to that, was like, oh, holy crap, here we go. Finally, right? And it kind of got lost in the mix of the news cycle, which I find terribly interesting. It could be the biggest event in human history, and it was covered up by the Kardashians, you know, and it's kind of strange to me.
Well, the proverbial cat is out of the bag, the genie out of the bottle, the toothpaste out of the tube. I mean, it's staring us in the face. I think that we're gonna in 24. I think we're gonna see other whistleblowers of caliber of David Grush. You know, Greer claims to have 750 witnesses now in his stable, and he's been doing this for 30 years. I've met a lot of those witnesses, obviously not over 100, but I've you know, they're solid. They're military. They're former intel guys. Some of them are, you know, worked at different corporate places where these materials have been studied and back engineered. I just think, you know, I joke in my book in a couple places that this is my farewell to ufology. I'm tired of all the predictions every year, usually about this time. Oh, disclosure is here. It's going to happen in the new year. And, oh, disclosure is coming. Well, I think it's here, but where is it going? And I think that's a big TBD writ large.
Well, Grush, here, okay. This is where I'm just going to be very frank. Grush, as excellent and as great of a moment as that was, and the things that he said, they were profound. But it's also tipping the hat and letting people peek underneath that there is somebody out there finally willing to step forward, because I live a stone's throw from Lockheed Skunk Works. It's literally a mile that way, a mile from my home. And leading up to, over the last, I'm going to say about a pretty good solid year, I was watching, I don't want to say a whole lot because I live here in the neighborhood and I don't want to have, you know, the men in black knocking on my door. But I'll say this, I was watching daily transport, big planes taking off and landing. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. And I was seeing other stuff too. That's another story. But I'm watching this, and then suddenly Grush's testimony happens, right? And those transport planes stopped. Now, is it because they knew that Grush was about to drop the dime, right? And they had to move stuff out of there? Because if whoever Grush wanted to disclose those addresses, right, and those locations, whatever was there is gone, right? You know what I mean? You got members of Congress showing up at a hangar with the address that Grush's gave them. They open it up and it's empty. Well, what would you expect to happen?
Yeah.
Right. And that's, you know what I mean? And that's the double-edged sword of testimony from a whistleblower like David Grush and others, that anything that is going to be at a location certainly wouldn't be there now. Why would you, as the CEO of Lockheed, still have a craft down here at Skunk Works? No, it would have been moved. So that's the weird part about it.
Yeah, but how long can you play
shelving?
Yeah, how long can you can't do that forever.
Well, I love your attitude, and that's my attitude too. But it maybe not even in this country. Fly that stuff to Grenada, right? And maybe that would be the case. That I was excited about that, but then again, if you're on that list, you would know that you were on that list. I
think Rick Bigelow's got stuff in the warehouses he constructed when his company did all the research for their the funding. They got $22 million from the government, and I read a great piece in the New York magazine shortly after the New York Times thing came out. Harry's laying into this reporter like, why don't you come to Vegas and look at some of the stuff we have? Nobody's done that.
Well, okay. Now here's the flip side to that, and I like Robert. I do. I like him, but here's the flip side. If you, Martin Keller, are in possession of, you've got. I'm just going to grab a flashlight, but let's say you've got some piece of alien tech. What do you do with it? Well, I'm going to tell you, if I had alien tech, you know what I'm doing? I'm going live. I'm going to do a press conference. I'm going to go live and go, here it is right here. Now, what have you got to say about it? And Bigelow hasn't done that. And that's
because a lot of it has subsequently been classified.
Who cares?
Or it's been moved into a SAP.
Who cares?
Full access project.
Well, that's the flip side to this for me, is that you could, if you Bigelow, forget about classified. You break all the rules, you break all the laws, and you go public with this. There is a religion based around you. You know what I mean? You would have statues for the rest of time. You would be the most popular, famous, extraordinary human in the history of everything.
You're more optimistic than I am on that score.
What's that?
I said you're more optimistic on that score than I am. I just think,
well, let me
see the stuff.
But let me ask you this, Martin, if you had this in your possession and you were threatened with prison, right?
Yeah. Do you live tomorrow on your show?
Would you do that? Would you go live? Would you go public with it?
Yeah, because it protects you.
Exactly. So why hasn't Bigelow done that?
I don't know.
Grush, by going public, absolutely did the right thing. He did, because now he's protected. I totally get that. And but the opposite, the danger with that is you've let all those nefarious dudes out there know that you're talking, so they would cover their tracks. So yeah, it's a weird conundrum that we find ourselves in. We finally got what we asked for. But then the bad dudes know somebody is finally cracked and is leaking information. And he comes from a position of knowledge, right? He's got the CV. He's coming from the right position. This isn't somebody, that's just, I was abducted by aliens last week and I want to talk to Congress. That's not who David Grush is.
His credentials are impeccable.
Completely impeccable. So why didn't the world implode though? After the New York Times piece, leading up to, you've got Elizondo and everybody else that surfaced over the last 5-6 years. At TTSA, remember that, right? We had all of that action going down, and the opposite happened with the world. It was like, of course we're not alone. Okay. That was a very strange thing to see happen, that those out there that normally would never talk about this, we're talking about it. I'm talking, coworkers, friends, family, whatever, that never talked about UFOs are saying, well, yeah, of course we're not alone in the universe. Okay, but I still have a mortgage to pay.
Right.
And that's the attitude that kind of happened, isn't it?
Pretty much. I've been of the opinion, though, that as much progress as we've made, once we get to the scarlet letter A for abduction, when that conversation comes up in Congress, I think this thing is going to get shut down overnight. I mean,
Why?
Well, I just think the public's going to go, well, what about this? Did this stuff really happen? I mean, I had a lot of experiences that might be described as abduction-like events in my own home. I don't know if it was ET. I don't know if it was some sort of poltergeist manifestation. I don't know if it was even maybe a rogue attack trying to create a false scenario, ET scenario, to drive fear into me or to anybody that has the real experience.
Well, what are you referring to? What happened?
Well, I started to talk about this early in the show with these strange events in my house. Probably the most dramatic was the night that five little red orbs showed up at 4:03 in the morning. And I was woken up long enough to see them. Two are at the foot of the bed like this, stationary. One was over here near the clock, which sat on our dresser. Another one was next to the window that looked down into the street. And the last one was near my head, and that one seemed to be inside and outside of the house. And that really got my attention. Like, what the hell is going on in here? I looked at the clock again to make sure I was awake and not dreaming. And now the two that had been stationary at the foot of the bed are synchronistically moving in opposite directions. And then I blacked out. But the next morning, like 2 hours later, when I got up to take our dogs for a walk around the lake, I had some residual physical effects. My crown chakra was tingling, would flare up like every 2 hours. And it did that for the next day and a half. I felt like I had no energy. I had no drive. I felt like my soul had been sucked out of me. And that was very concerning. Now, was that an abduction experience? I don't know. I mean, I got hypnotized once by Dr. Richard Haynes out in Arizona during one of Greer's sky watches, and one of his the first ambassadors to the universe event that he put on in the late 90s. And we explored some of that under hypnosis, and there was a lot of avoidance on my part and a lot of heavy breathing. So, I mean, maybe I need to go under again and get to the heart of this. But I mean, that was a dramatic event, but there were others less severe, I guess is one word I might use.
How do you describe the orbs? Were they physical? Were they balls of light? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
they were opaque, little red orbs the size of a ping pong ball. And here's a spoiler. And I'd forgotten about this other incident in high school. The same week we saw the craft outside during the basketball game. and this is all detailed pretty heavily in my book, and I'd completely forgotten about this until I went under hypnosis. And Dick Haynes says, well, let's look at your sighting in high school with your buddies. What do your friends say about it? And I just sort of nonchalantly said, well, my best friend Jim says it's not like the one we saw in the park. And he says, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, under hypnosis, I said, well, I'm not sure. So when I came out of hypnosis, he goes, when you get back to Minneapolis, you should call your friend Jim and see what you were referring to tonight, because I think this is really interesting. So I called him, my first call when I got home. He goes, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. He said, it was that night we were big men on campus in high school. He was president of student council. I was his vice president. We were debate partners. We booked rock and roll bands for the school to raise money for different things. We were walking to a student council meeting one night. His house was on the backside of Rocky Butte Park, and out from the top of this butte came this little red object, same size, ping pong size ball, all red, and it hovered in front of us for 10 minutes, and we stopped in our tracks. And Jim goes, what the hell is that? And we were good Catholic boys. We were both altar boys. And I said, it's the devil, because it was red, and we didn't know what the hell it was. And neither one of us can remember how the event ended, but it obviously went away because we continued our walk through the park over to the school to get to this meeting on time. And I had completely forgotten about that until I was hypnotized. So in the book, I say, well, was the object in the park comparable to the ones in the bedroom, 30 years down the road? And if so, what is it? It obviously seemed to be under some sort of intelligent control. There were some physical manifestations after the 5 in the bedroom. There wasn't anything from the single one in the park during high school. So, I mean, that's just the kind of stuff that I had experienced at a pretty high strangeness level, I think you would agree.
Yeah. But also, I think fairly normal. You're talking to somebody that,
normal to you and me, but
right.
I can't even bring up this discussion with a lot of my best friends,
I don't know. You can now. Don't be scared. But here's the thing. Did the incident in your bedroom happen after a CE5 evening?
You know when it happened? It happened the night I got back from Fort Collins. I went to the International New Science meeting where I met Greer again, and then I also met Brian O'Leary, who was the one of the original Marsnauts. He was assigned to the Mars mission before NASA canceled that program. And Brian went really smart guy. I mean, he went to Princeton, he has all these letters after his name. Brian went total woo-woo, I think. I mean, when I talked to Brian, I just went, wow, what prompts a transformation like this for somebody who was in the National Space Program? So I interviewed him about Greer's organization. I interviewed some other folks there. I met Dick Haynes for the first time, who worked at NASA Ames and was an advisor to CSETI, an unpaid advisor, guy that hypnotized me in the desert, whole chapter on that. I got back from that. I told my wife, I said, I'm going to finish this story and I'm going to get the hell out of this issue. It's too weird. There's a lot of really brilliant people working in the field, and I don't know what all this stuff is going on in our house, but I want it to be over. Well, it didn't end, and obviously here I am still talking about it.
Well, and the reason why I bring it up is you may have made that conscious connection during a CE5 event, and that stuff followed you home. I don't think that
Well, the
that is.
hitchhiker effect. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It seemed malevolent, whereas some of these other things in my room were, I would see lights in the bedroom. And I mean, one night I woke up and my side of the bed faced out onto the street, and I saw a white light hit me. It didn't come from up in the sky. It came from on the ground, right on the bank of the Minnehaha Creek, which was a stone's throw from our bedroom. And I thought, somebody hit me with a light that's on the ground out there. And then I blacked out. Weird stuff.
Yeah. I was in my kitchen. Two, 3 months ago. I'm standing. I've got a little coffee corner, and I'm cooking. I'm standing at the stove, but I'm facing. Okay, so to my right, it's just a wall. And to the right is the rest of the house. To my left is the kitchen window. Blinds are closed, and it's kind of like duskish. Maybe around 6 o'clock or so. But I'm cooking, and to my left, where the blinds are, I see this flash of light, and it goes like 3 times, blip, blip, blip. But I caught the first one, and I turn and look at the blinds, and I see it flash like 2 more times, like the blinds lit up, like something. And I turned to my right to see what it was, and I'm looking at my kitchen cabinets. Right, I was like, now what caused that? And I just stopped. I just smiled. I was like, well, okay. Am I going to freak out? There was nothing. My kitchen cabinets suddenly have, high beams and we're flashing. But yeah.
So are you a contactee, as they used to say, or an experiencer?
Maybe. I don't talk about much my own experiences on the show. And the reason for that is I don't want to contaminate other people's experiences. I just don't want to do that. I've got too big of an audience, and I just don't want to do that. So I have talked about stuff at the very top surface level, but the deep stuff, no, I don't discuss it. Also, for me, it's very personal. So what I do, Martin, is the opposite. I listen to everybody and see if that's something that is connected with my own experiences. Because what that does is, it cements me, it grounds me. I'm not crazy. That's one.
You're not losing your cookies.
You're right. And trust me, I've lost my cookies too many times. But the other part is, I want to know if their experiences are real. Okay? Yeah. All right? And so that's what I do. I'm a collector of information, and I just kind of let it sit right there.
That's kind of how I felt. But when I wrote this book, I thought this is closure for me. I'm done. I know enough. It's like what J. Allen Hynek said, who went from being a raving skeptic to being a believer, for lack of a better word. It's like the guy that coined all the nomenclature for close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. His famous statement is, there's an embarrassment of riches in terms of evidence. And there is. I mean, there's just so much. I'm done with it. I mean, I'm an English major. I love stories. I love storytelling. I love writing about things. And this is a subject I never dreamed I would write about at any point in my life, until all the weirdness started. And I met Greer, and the rest is off to the races. But
yeah. Greer, if Greer would, Greer needs to get out of his own way. That's
been Stephen's problem
Yeah.
from day one. I mean, when I met the guy in 1991, he was a pariah then, even to the few people in what he calls the UFO ghetto. He was a pariah then, and now he's a huge pariah because he's got an international following. I still think he's one of the most intelligent analysts on topic, not to mention the stuff that he does with the CE5 initiative and the disclosure effort. I see a lot of Greer's handiwork in some of these people like the congressman from Tennessee, Tim Burchett. It's interesting, all these guys and women that are pushing for disclosure, all Republicans, fairly conservative, if not downright redneck, some of them. I find that fascinating. I don't know where the connection, the disconnect or the connections are, but I hear a lot of Greer's thinking when these guys start to talk publicly. And, he claims that he mentored David Grush 2 years before Grush went public, once the whistleblower protection was.
You know how many people have said that now? He's not the only one. So I totally get that. I do. But here's the other part of this, though. If I take Greer and put him on the shelf for a second, the crazy part about it is that when I hear something else or I read something else, not as and I see his name or I hear something totally unrelated, but I'm like, what is going on? And that's the part where Greer, he's almost like an enigma, because he says some very big things, very big claims, right? If I hear one more time about him flying in some G5 Gulfstream with the Prince of Abu Dhabi or whatever, and talking about disclosure, and ET, I'll just lose it, right? But then so you have these big things that he says, but it's the little stuff where if he would just get out of his own way, like, for instance, when we look at the Eric Davis memo and, the Wilson Davis document, as it's been called. When I got sent that document originally, and I was one of two people, Richard Dolan was the other one. And so we get this email, and I finally, after 2 weeks, I open it up and I'm reading the document, and I'm going there, and there it is, right? In 1998, at the Pentagon with Dr. Steve, or with Stephen Greer and Edgar Mitchell and Admiral. Reading them, I was like, what?
Will Miller, yeah, Commander Miller.
Well, so that was a letter that was in there. But anyway, Miller was there. So anyway, so I call up Greer and I go, dude, I'm reading this document. What are you talking about, Jimmy? And I tell him, and I said, okay, so listen. And this was on like a Monday or a Tuesday. I sent it to him. And he calls me back and he goes, see, I told you. I said, well, yeah, I know, but okay, so let's do Coast to Coast this weekend. So I turn around, I bring Greer on Coast. And it's those little things, Martin. It's that's what Greer should focus on. Not the other sensational stuff. If he would get out of his own way, he could do a lot. And that's my opinion. But there's so much out there that validates some of the things that he has said.
Yeah, Stephen has served his purpose, and I admire it for him. I admire him for it. He gave up a very promising, lucrative medical career to devote his life to this, and that was a huge sacrifice. And I would just end the discussion right there. And maybe you want to talk about rock and roll, the time we have left, or you want to keep going?
Sure. We could dip our toes in the rock and roll water. Let's actually start here. How did you meet Prince?
I had heard about Prince, just kind of hanging around the music scene here in the Twin Cities in the mid to late 70s, and I started hearing rumors about this black kid from North Minneapolis, where a lot of African American folks live, who played all instruments and seemed to be a pretty good songwriter. And then the next thing I heard is like, wow, Prince got signed to a 5-album deal at Warner Brothers by Owen Husney, his first manager, who I ended up calling and got friendly with. And I said, I want to do a story. So I think I was one of the first 2 or 3 people in town to write about Prince. I was in an alternative weekly, or not a weekly, turned into an alternative weekly. It was a monthly music rag called Sweet Potato, after the ocarina rather than the tuber. And then after about a year of publishing that, it turned into an alternative weekly called City Pages that I wrote for until 1983. But my first interview with Prince, and I had a lot of interaction with Prince socially and professionally until I got out of that business. And the first interview we did, he was 17 years old. He'd just been signed to this very lucrative Warner's contract, giving him kind of lock, stock, and barrel. They allowed him to produce his own record, which is almost unheard of for a new artist at that time. And he was at his drummer's, Bobby Rifkin. His brother David Z is a well-known producer, now living in LA. It was in Bobby's apartment over by one of the lakes here in Uptown. And Prince was in the kitchen sitting on the floor. So I got introduced by Bobby. And I thought, gee, I guess I better sit on the floor and get on his level. Although I can assure you, no one is on Prince's level. No one has ever been on Prince's level. And he was so shy and retiring, I thought, I'm not going to get any quotes from this guy to, turn into a good story. And he was against the stove. I was against the refrigerator. We talked for about 40 minutes, and that was that. And then I went to his debut show at the Capri Theater, which I thought was pretty underwhelming. And I think the Warner Brothers guys that flew in from both coasts thought it was pretty underwhelming too. But then the next time I saw him, like 9 months later at the State Theater downtown, complete transformation. The guy was unbelievable. He's hardly dressed in any clothes. He's, I think his Dirty Mind album had just come out, and he was promoting the hell out of that. And he was on his way, and really talented, smart, very introverted individual. And I used to go to his birthday parties. There was a Prince birthday party where I'm out on the dance floor with my girlfriend at the time, and I see this short, attractive young woman dancing next to me. I went, gee, that looks like Stevie Nicks. And I did a double take and went, hey, that is Stevie Nicks. He was dating her at the time. Another birthday party a couple years later, Sheila E. climbed into Bobby Z's drums, started playing the hell out of stuff as Prince and the band would perform at every one of these parties. And I went, uh-oh, Bobby Z's going to lose his job tonight, which eventually happened.
Well, I think Prince was an alien. That's the segue. And I tell you why I say that. When you look at individual artists that just show up and leave us, it's very strong when, you know, the obvious things are like Elvis and Jimi Hendrix, but you can look at, you know, like a David Bowie, for instance, or certainly a Prince, where these individuals are completely unique, complete individual that transformed everything that around them, and you can look at the music industry at each one of these individuals and say, well, there was the music industry before Prince and after Prince. There was a world before Prince and a world, right? A culture after him. And it's very strange to me how these individuals can come in and change society, change culture, change music, change art,
Fashion.
change politics, fashion, right? All of that, and then leave us. It's very strange.
It's interesting you bring up Bowie and Elvis as being maybe in the alien artist camp. Have you read Michael Luckman's book?
I have. He's been on the show a couple times. Yeah.
I heard he passed away, but he has a second book that I know Grant Cameron up in Canada is trying to help get published. But, you know, Presley was totally into this. David Bowie, on one of his tours of America, had a special platform built into the bus so he could go up on the roof and look at the sky as they were traveling cross country. I mean, really, another thing, though, that probably more substantial is Prince's manager, Owen, who I just alluded to earlier, got him this great contract. Owen had a really dramatic daylight sighting out in a little town west of here called Hutchinson. He was out driving with his fiance at the time, whose name was Connie, and they were listening to classical music CD. And they just, you know, they were just doing a day trip, get out of the city, blah, blah, blah. And he said all of a sudden the CD player starts to fritz, you know, it's cracking and stuff. And he goes, oh, great, there's a cop out here on one of these, on the road. Why? And it kept going like this. And he goes, why doesn't this goddamn cop just come out and bust me? And, you know, I'll take the speeding ticket if I'm speeding. And before he could almost finish that thought, here comes a low-flying disc over his car. And Owen, you know, I met with Owen several times after this occasion, and he's going, what the hell is that? And his wife very nonchalantly goes, Owen, that's a flying saucer. No way. You know? So he calls in when they get back to the city. He calls the police department out there, and he says, have you guys had any sightings of UFOs? And no, nothing really. And then called the weather station there. Did you guys have like a balloon or something up? No, we don't use those anymore. And so a very dramatic daylight sighting, pretty unusual, I think. But several months after this, at 4 a.m, Owen was awakened in his bedroom by this. He said, all the lights in my house came on. He said, at first I thought I was having a medical emergency and I was hallucinating this. He says, but then I realized I'm wide awake. And the first thing that comes into my mind once I get over the shock of the lights, all the lights being on in my house that he can see from his bed, he goes, my first thought is they've come back to check on me. So I tell that story in the book with a few more little interesting sidelights, but there's also a nice picture of Prince in there from his heyday. But
yeah, the you know what I've always been fascinated with is also my own experiences, certainly, but that artist, creative types, because of their ability to meditate and go into the zone and get to that creative level where things explode. That's a vibration of the brain that I think ET understands. And what's really strange about that is, and we can go out throughout history and look at any sculptor or artist or poet or writer, that they would then flow. And musicians, I think, have always been open to it because they have the ability to free the mind. And you can go to so many different, not only lyrical content in the songs, but the album covers and the conversations that they've had. John Lennon had his famous sighting in New York.
Daylight sighting.
Yeah. Daylight. But why do you? That's my idea behind this. Why do you think those creative types have had these channeled experiences and these contact experiences?
Well, I think you nailed it. And in fact, in the book, you'll see almost the exact same quote from Owen. We went to lunch to discuss my work with Greer's organization. And then, he obviously shared his sighting story with me there. And then he said, he says, I think artists and people who are sort of on the creative edge of general society are open to this, are open to these types of contact events with phenomena at any level, whether it's, a UFO or some, spiritual beings, whatever. He said, I think they just have the ability or they have the willingness to experience it. They let themselves open to it. I don't know if there's been any studies on that, but it would be interesting to look into that. But totally agree with that.
Yeah. When you look at somebody like I brought him up earlier, Da Vinci and his creative process, where either he was a time traveler, right, or met somebody from the future that gave him these ideas, or he's channeling this and the information was given to him from somewhere else. You have something like that, and then you fast forward to now, where Sammy Hagar has got a chapter in his book about just that an umbilical cord came down from a UFO and attached to his head and downloaded him with information.
Yeah, him and Dave Davies from the Kinks.
Yeah, same thing.
Same deal.
Yeah, same deal. And and I'm thankful that they talk about this stuff, but we have to really kind of scientifically take a look at this. Is it entanglement? Is this something that has been going on throughout history? Is this what happened to Moses on the top of Mount Sinai? Right. And that it's been happening over and over again. And there may be something else to it.
Yeah. These are the big questions, Jimmy.
Well, do you think in the short time that we have left, let's suppose something for a second, that these things are confirmed by physicists, that these things are now, because they're talking about the metaverse and parallel worlds and entanglement and qubits and quantum computing. And well, all of this is what our community has been talking about for years and years. But let's suppose we cross that, right? That Rubicon. We go right there, and that this does become a part of our reality. Is that the next stage of evolution? Is that where we need to go as Earthlings?
I think so. I think this brings up the whole area of consciousness, and I was fortunate enough to be with Ed Mitchell, Apollo astronaut Ed Mitchell, Dr. Ed Mitchell, who was, had his own epiphany coming back from the moon. Everything was connected. When he got back and got out of the space program, he set up the Noetic Institute, dedicated to the study of consciousness, the science of consciousness. I was lucky enough to be with Ed and Brian O'Leary, the Marsnaut, and Greer, and 3 Russians that had gotten flown over to Asilomar, California for a debrief in the 90s prior to the first Washington, D.C. disclosure event. And, this is all on tape, but I was sitting next to Ed and Brian, and we were taking a break, and these guys all of a sudden just strike up a conversation like, well, Einstein's theory of relativity needs to be written because it lacks one essential integer. It lacks the consciousness factor. And I'm going, here's these two guys kind of like talking about this, like, well, should we get a pizza or do you want a hot dog for lunch? Just kind of casually, throwing this around after we'd spent about a day and a half listening to these Russian generals describe their experiences abroad. So, I've had a good trip in the UFO ghetto, as Greer likes to call it. But I had a really good trip through the Twin Cities rock and roll scene, which is you can find in my memoir from that period called Hijinx and Hearsay.
And I've got the links up, Martin, for you below, and everybody can go visit the spacepenclub.com and Hijinx. The links are below, and we've got them over on our website. Martin, thank you so much. What a great conversation tonight, my friend. Just amazing.
Thank you. I've been wanted to be on your show for a while, and I'm glad you and Michelle made the invitation.
And thank you so much, Martin. Be safe and stay warm.
Happy holidays, Jimmy.
Happy holidays, Martin. Thank you so much. Martin Keller, everybody. The links for Martin are below. Everything is right there. So, and also his Twitter and all of his social media stuff is right there. Great conversation tonight. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis, Kevin, Bill, and Genocide. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night, what's going on tomorrow night? Oh, Mark Hartzman is with us. Yeah, we're going to continue the conversation. We are not alone. All of that tomorrow night right here on Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until then, be safe. Go Backley Tappy.